this story comes alive on a piece of matzah. So something like that, I would have never even imagined tackling before. So it pushed me out of my comfort zone in a lot of good ways. And I think hopefully I did that for Aaron too, kind of, we challenge each other in very good ways. And that was one of the bigger learning experiences, I think, for me while working on this. Hi, I'm Alex Schumacher, cartoonist and co-creator behind the upcoming Schticks and Stones holiday special on Kickstarter. You can find me on social media, Instagram and Blue Sky at AJ Schumacher Art. You can find me on my website, alexschumacherart.com, and obviously on Kickstarter for Schticks and Stones. And you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We're joined today by one half of a dynamic duo of a writer and artist. This guest has been on the show before in the past. I believe this is his third time on the show. Slowly reaching that 5-timers club mark on Two Geeks Talking here today. He is the co-creator and artist of Schticks and Stones, a holiday special which is currently on Kickstarter. We're joined by the ever-talented Alex Schumacher. How you doing today?
Thank you, Kurt, for the kind words, and thank you for having me back on. Doing pretty good. Haven't had enough coffee, but that's just how it goes.
I'll stop the interview right now if you want to make a pot. I'm fine with that.
No, I think I can make it through.
For those that want to know more about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing this time around to Two Geeks Talking.
Sure. Before, I think I have spoken about a couple, earlier projects, obviously. So this is a little different. Well, I started back in about 2015, kind of in earnest as a comics creator, and did some web comics, and then found myself veering more into the kid lit base, where I got myself a literary agent, and we've been working on middle grade books. That seems kind of to be the hot market for graphic novels right now. Through the process of artistic experimentation, kind of came up with some different stories. And one of the stories was one called Crime and Passover with a collaborator of mine named Aaron Cohen. We did that for the Scott Snyder Presents the Cloakroom anthology, which is a showcase for Scott Snyder students. Now, Aaron is one of those. I was not, but we did get connected through our friend Tony Wolf, wonderful cartoonist in his own right. And that was the first story for now Schticks and Stones, which is what we're talking about today. It's a collection of 3 Jewish holidays, madcap mysteries with a Meshuggah family. We're aiming for it to be about 32 pages. It's going to have behind the scenes stuff and an interconnecting story. And we're adding 2 new stories along with Crime and Passover, one for Purim and one for Hanukkah.
That's awesome. I love it. But if you strip away the holiday context of Schticks and Stones here, what's the core engine of this series? And what kind of story machine are you actually building under the hood?
Yeah, it's really about, for us, I think for Aaron and I, it's about connection. It's about storytelling, and it's about relatability in a lot of ways, because for us, especially nowadays, I think, joyful and positive Jewish representation is pretty sorely needed. So that's one aspect of it, obviously. But like you said, take away that kind of artifice of the religion and the holidays. And what we hope is there is a relatable story about, big gregarious families feeling like a kid in what can seem sometimes like an adults only world. And also when you sort of extrapolate from all of the traditions and the cultural aspects, it's really a story about, any kind of big immigrant and, marginalized, whatever kind of community. Our idea has been this relatability in specificity, where we're talking about things that have happened, to us in our lives. But when you do that and you really are honest about that, you find that a lot of people have experienced the same things, because we like to think of ourselves as humans as these special snowflakes, and in a lot of ways we are. Sure. But when we're talking about experiences, and we have those days where you think, oh, this has never happened to anybody else in the history of the world. Of course it has. It's happened to a lot of people. And when we're honest about that with each other, I think we find that we have far more in common than we do have things that divide us. So that's a large part of this project for Aaron and I as well. And the representation again is important, but for us it's about, I think he made the joke at one point. It's sort of the jumping on point for people who always want to know about Judaism and were too afraid to ask. So there's that aspect too. But when it comes down to it, yeah, it's about feeling like an outcast, feeling like you're still trying to find your place in the world. All of those wonderful things that the entirety of the middle grade sort of section of graphic novels and comics is talking about in very real ways with kids, which I think is important. So hopefully we're adding a little bit to that conversation.
I think so for sure. Because I mean, my family holiday dinners used to be like we used to go to our grandparents' house, and you'd always have these aunts and uncles, and everyone would try to be one upping each other. Oh, so and so got into law school,
Yeah,
and so it's like, yeah, I'm in IT. Give me a break here. I'm not a teacher. What do you want from me? Like,
right.
it is
And
what
you
it.
get all those big personalities together,
Yeah.
and hilarity and chaos is bound to ensue. So that's kind of what we're trying to harness a little bit.
But that's good because we need comedy, like you mentioned here. It's a very rough world currently as it is
Yeah,
for all people in general, for that matter.
absolutely.
But you both use the phrase "all the Jewish funny, none of the Jewish guilt," which
Yeah.
I think is a perfect coin of phrase, and that's the perfect tagline for this particular series. How do you keep the sharp tones and specific, family matters and things like you just previously mentioned without sliding into like cheap stereotypes or just easy punchlines?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that you have to be meticulous and very, intent about what you are portraying, or it's very easy to slide into stereotypes. And I think stereotypes can come in handy at times with storytelling when you are presenting it to an audience that maybe doesn't know a lot about your specific culture or traditions, because it's a shorthand if it's something that they recognize. And we do that just a little bit by using something like Hanukkah that everybody's heard of, so people know menorahs and those kind of things. But the way that you approach it, I think the way that we are executing the stories is kind of the important part, because we're trying to fall way more back on the personalities of the characters and their interrelatability with each other and the smaller moments between them. So, like we were saying before, it becomes less about the religion or the culture or the ideas or whatever that separate us, and more about those tiny moments that we've all experienced in between the big family blowouts or the crazy dog stealing food off the table or whatever it is in at those gatherings.
Yeah.
But I think you have to be very mindful about what you're portraying and how you're portraying it, or it is very easy to fall into some kind of stereotype. So how we're doing that, I think one of the ways is, when we have the sort of kidlit all ages category that we're sort of playing to some degree, you kind of have to wrap the cultural aspects and those things in something more, I guess, exciting or entertaining for that age group. So for us, it's doing sort of these Scooby-Doo madcap mysteries around the holidays and playing up the creativity of this kid, Ben, who's our main character, a lot, because that's also, an important aspect of Judaism, like humor and creativity, and not just for Judaism, but it is an important, I think, part of our culture, and people in our community have added a lot to those genres, those artistic milieus. For us, it's more about that and playing up the funny and playing up the mystery of it all and the who done it, and this kid who very much lives in his own head, contriving of these situations to kind of entertain himself in these big, adults only family, moments.
Yeah.
I think it's that for us, where it's not using it as, a cover necessarily, but I think you have to be very intentful on what you're concentrating on, or yeah, it can very easily fall into stereotype. So hopefully we've avoided that a little bit. But also, if we're presenting things, because we do use a lot of Yiddish, which I suppose can be seen as stereotypical in some ways, but we use it to sort of emphasize and punctuate certain moments of humor. And our whole thing is, if reading our stuff causes you to go Google something or learn something new, that's not a bad thing. If you're there for the humor and the mystery and the whatever, that's great too.
It's kind of interesting because you're the second creator that I've had on the show that has used Yiddish in their actual comics. Ari Gross is another one that
Oh,
did
sure.
some for
Yeah.
his amazing comic series a couple of years back. But playing into the mystery side of things, because everyone loves good mystery. It's always fun, whether it's for kids or whether it's for adults. You know, I love Sherlock Holmes and everything like that because that's what got me into reading. But you have 3 holidays to work with. You have Purim,
Mhm.
Passover, and Hanukkah. You know, how did you decide what kind of mystery to solve and that belong to each of these particular holidays?
So I think that's where we really kind of dug into the Jewish side to some degree because we made them very specific to the holidays. And with Jewish holidays, from the sort of surface knowledge that I have of other holidays, for Jewish holidays, there's this kind of built-in mystery, like with Hanukkah, and I guess with Christmas too. It's this idea of what are the presents. So with Passover, there's this prophet that we have that we leave a seat open for and present a plate for, and they're supposed to show up at some point, and will they or won't they? So there's a lot of mystery that's kind of built in to these Jewish holidays, and I think we were playing those up a little bit to contrive of these storylines that would utilize a lot of what makes those holidays fun and special while still being accessible for everybody. Yeah, and we love Sherlock Holmes. Aaron's watched, I think, Young Sherlock Holmes is
Yeah,
one of his favorites
that's a good one.
these days. I've loved things like even Psych or going to oh God, what was the one with Elijah Wood, the really weird one? He was
Oh,
like a private investigator. Do you know which one I'm talking
I know
about?
the one you talk. It's on the tip of my
This,
tongue, but yeah,
yeah, it's escaping me at this moment. But or even like the Knives Out series. People enjoy good mysteries, cozy mysteries, crazy mysteries, whatever it is. And so obviously ours is being kept in kind of a PG-13
sure.
sort of range, but yeah, that's what we were doing to sort of make it specifically ours. And I think that's what good mysteries do is they use the location, they use the people that are involved, they use all of these specific things to make it very unique. If every mystery was the same, every mystery had the same stock characters, and that's sort of the sort of humor with Clue, right? Is that's
Mm,
the idea. And we definitely reference Clue because we love both the game and I love the movie. I mean, I know people have their issues with the movie, but I unabashedly like it.
yeah.
So the sort of madcap stuff, I usually joke that the comic is, if Mel Brooks were to write a Scooby-Doo comic
Hmm.
strip, is sort of how I describe it. So that's kind of what we did. We harnessed the sort of specific things that we could for sort of these madcap family mysteries, but that were very much integrated in the holidays themselves. So like the Crime and Passover one, that one came out, like I said, in the Scott Snyder Presents the Cloakroom. So this isn't a spoiler, but the whole conceit is that the main character Ben is trying to find the person that he thinks is the Afikoman thief. Now at Passover, the thing is we take a half of matzah, it's wrapped in cloth or tin foil, and the kids go and search for it, and whoever finds it gets a prize. So Ben is upset because this one person has always stolen the Afikoman every year, always knows where it is, always gets to it first, and so that one is all about him trying to unmask and out the Afikoman thief. So for that one specifically, that's how we tied the holiday into it all. So for the other two, we're doing something similar. Little premises, little synopses are on the Kickstarter page if you want to read them. But definitely, we're obviously trying not to spoil much. But
Sure.
the Crime and Passover one, that's a good example to kind of show how we're doing that, how we're folding the Judaism, the cultural Judaism
Sure.
more than anything else, but how we're folding that into the stories.
Yeah, I was going to ask that because, and you explained this perfectly, and this leads into my next question, which is, what did that first story of Crime and Passover teach you, and did it change how you wrote the other two in the series?
Yeah, so Aaron is the writer on this series, and I came in as artist. So backtrack a little bit. So Aaron is Scott Snyder's student,
Hmm.
and that's kind of how the opportunity fell into his lap to present this story to get into the anthology. And then our friend Tony introduced us. So Aaron had the story and these characters, and the world felt very familiar to me. These were people that I grew up with. This was a place that I had spent many, many hours running around. So it felt very familiar to me. Just before that, it was hot on the heels of Effects of Pickled Herring, which I know I've come on and talked to you about
Hmm.
as well. And so that was the same kind of thing, the playing up the sort of cultural Judaism, the Jewish joy, those kind of aspects. So when Aaron sent me the story, when we were introduced, it felt like a very natural, next step, or a very comfortable thing to do, which was right in line, which what I think I was trying to do a little bit with Effects of Pickled Herring.
Yeah.
And I hadn't collaborated for a very long time. There are lots of reasons that I haven't, but you have to be able to trust people. You have to be able to work well with people. And it can be very hard to do that. You get into creating and it becomes very personal, and it becomes, the ego can get involved. But with Aaron, it was, collaboration was something that I learned could be quite easy when it was the right collaborator. It's very much like, I say it like a band, being kind of a musician in my former life. You have to find people. You could be the best musicians in the world. Sometimes when those musicians get into a band, it's an awful band, because being the best musician doesn't necessarily mean you play well with others. So any kind of art is sort of the same way. And the way that Aaron and I found that we were able to trade ideas, bounce off each other, and then we brought in our colorist Ralph, who Aaron met through the Kubert School. It was the same thing. It was very quick. We developed a shorthand, very shortly into Crime and Passover. And I was also kind of developing a newer sort of art style, a progression of the art style that I had been using. And so what it really taught me was how to kind of expand that a little bit more, push that a little bit more. There's a double page spread in Crime and Passover, which, not to give too much away, but the direction was basically, this story comes alive on a piece of matzah. So something like that, I would have never even imagined tackling before. So it pushed me out of my comfort zone in a lot of good ways. And I think hopefully I did that for Aaron too, kind of, we challenge each other in very good ways. And that was one of the bigger learning experiences, I think, for me while working on this. I think we've both been kind of sharpening our skills a little bit with this, but it's also just a joy to work on. That's a huge aspect when you're trying to collaborate with people, is it needs to be enjoyable. If it feels like, I don't know, an impacted bowel or something, it's not going to be the best experience. And some collaborations I've been in can feel a little bit like that. So for me, it was that with Aaron, where it just felt very easy from the get-go. We were able to push each other out of our comfort zones and maybe, improve ourselves a little bit with each other. And I think those are the biggest takeaways for me from Crime and Passover, which is why this is now going to be our third collaboration. The second being another story in a separate Cloakroom issue called The Spelling Bee, which is not connected to this, but a lot of fun if you haven't checked it out. People out there. Cloakroom number 5, Spelling Bee.
Yeah, I've had tales from the Cloakroom 1 and 2 on the show. So I had the editors of 2 on the show, and we talked about that series. And then
cool.
A whole bunch of people from the first Cloakroom on the show. I think it was like 4 or 5 people, which is one of my larger interviews I had in the past. But
yeah, that's pretty big.
But now they're up to 5, which is awesome. Like I think that collection of amazing stories and creative people, and I think that's one of the best networking experiences you can have from a large mastermind in terms of that aspect. And
absolutely,
and everyone's just improves greatly from it, no matter what area of comics you're in.
Yeah, and from what I understand, there's sort of different levels that you can purchase for Scott to be like in this class, workshop, whatever it's called. And Aaron basically has his ear, Scott Snyder's ear, whenever he has a new script that he's working on, a new project, and he can send it, and Scott will give him notes and let him know if something's not working, let him know why things are working. And like you said, just I think having that, Aaron's written for a very, very long time. He's been a comics fan for a very, very long time, but he's sort of newer to actually writing comics. And he comes from film and TV, so it's, sort of a hop, skip, and a jump. It's not the steepest learning curve. And he's a great storyteller, and that's kind of the most important part. So yeah, to have that kind of tutelage very early on in your comics writing career, I'm sure that's something that he'll, cherish and look back on it as something that was definitely a huge step for him. I mean, that's a big step forward when you can have somebody in Scott Snyder's position, being kind of your Sherpa. But you're right; those anthologies are just brimming with really, really talented people, and that's really the amazing thing about indie comics right now. And on Kickstarter, which I'm sort of I dragged my heels a little bit, and the actual running of the campaign is still something that I probably never want to do again, because it is not my bag. But God bless the people who do it. but the point being is that's a space where these really, really tremendous, magnificent, indie comics exist and might not elsewhere because the direct market is just so cutthroat. So
Yeah.
to have that avenue for people to explore and put their work out there, and that includes the Cloakroom. I mean, clearly, I don't think Scott would teach people that he didn't think were, at least, diamonds in the rough. He's going to be, scrutinizing about who he chooses. Those books are great. Yeah, and I definitely, and Jerry and Veronica, Jerry Carita and
Yep.
Veronica Howell, who are the editors now, are amazing as well. So they put together such a great package every time.
Yeah, Jerry was on the show talking about his Bear comic series
Yeah,
a
yeah,
couple
yeah.
years back, which was a great conversation. And it's just like I'm glad to see he's moved to other avenues as well too. So and then Tony
Yeah,
Wolf, he was on the show a while back too. I forgot to mention that, but
yeah.
I love seeing what he creates and does, and he has
He's
a
incredible. Yeah.
yeah, his own comic series is very reminiscent of a few other that I read back in the day as well too. So you never know who you're going to connect with in this industry, whether you're an
Yeah.
indie or a pro or whatever the case may be, because it's a small community. Even though it's a
It,
worldwide phenomenon, but it feels like a small community sometimes.
yeah. Do you know Craig Rasmussen?
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, he's done a bunch at these points. He's doing like boom variant covers and stuff now, which is really cool. But we always make the joke that comics is a small town. So, but that's a good and a bad thing. But accentuating the positive, people ask how you get in comics. Well, you make comics and then you go to conventions or you get involved in indie spaces online and you can build a really, really wonderful network that is supportive and encouraging and will help you, edit your comics if you're new to it or, give you advice and tips and you can ask for guidance. And it's just a really, really wonderful time to be a comics creator right now. And I feel, honored to be involved with that in any small way.
now the fact that you've done the effects of pickled herring. What's new in my research was Flash Gordon Adventures from Paper Cuts. Congratulations on that. That's huge. That's
Thank you.
another
Yeah.
great publisher right there for young adult comics there.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of building a network, I got to know Adam Walenta
Mm-hmm.
years ago when and we were just a couple cartoonists kind of supporting each other and encouraging each other. Like I said, he then became an editor at Paper Cuts and started to do something that I find to be exceedingly rare these days, where he actually started, he climbed up the ladder a little bit and actually dropped it back down for some people that he knew. And so I feel very humbled and grateful that he would think of me and bring me on board for something like that because it was just such an amazing project to be part of.
I've had Trevor Mueller on because he did
Yeah.
the Steam series as well. Like, there's so many talented people that are working for these things, and I see these new publishers and everything like that. But I love the pay it forward aspect. I think that's something that is definitely needed these days, and I'm glad that people are still doing that, no matter their level of success. Because yeah, the ladder up is hard, but the way down is pretty easy too. So you got to be careful in that
Yeah.
respect. Well, what's one specific layout you keep returning to when you want a joke to land that makes them naturally funny before a single word balloon hits the page?
So I like to use negative space a lot. I think, using one of the really wonderful things about comics is the way that the sequential storytelling works is you can use the gutters and the page turns for things like time jumps or something that happens sort of behind the scenes, and if you're planning that outright it becomes just intuitive. But that's why I get a little upset when teachers or people say that comics and graphic novels aren't really reading. It is reading. It's not the same reading as prose, but it does require its own kind of visual literacy that you need to understand to read a comic. So when somebody has that, they just kind of go with you through those changes. And so for me, when I really try to make something land, and there's a good example of this in the Crime and Passover story, we're doing this introduction of the family, sort of this really chaotic introduction where we're throwing everybody at you
Yeah.
and we're introducing all the aunts and uncles and the whole Megillah. And then we're talking about Elijah, the prophet that I mentioned before, who never really shows up and there's always this empty seat for. And we wanted to make a joke about him being part of the family. And so I just kind of put this like lone panel at the bottom of the page with a decent amount of space in between, where all of the other family was. So you can manipulate sort of time and beats like that when you're laying out the page. I try to pay a lot of attention to that when it comes to humor. Sparingly, but using things like when you break the panel border. So there's little old school cartooning tricks that I have at my disposal when I'm trying to make something land. And it does really depend on the joke. It's not a one size fits all kind of thing. And with Aaron and I, when he has a joke like that, we are very good about conferring with one another about that, and kind of finding out the best way to make it land. And with us, it really is the best idea wins. We're not super precious about, oh, you have to do my words exactly like this, or, oh no, I laid out this page and this is exactly how I want it. We're very good with each other about letting things wither on the vine if something better comes along. Yeah. So I think that's a huge part, making those things land, is collaboration, and whether that be with really tremendous editor, who we're actually working with Veronica Howell from the Cloakroom on this. So whether it's working with somebody like that, sometimes it's very easy to get very precious about our ideas and the way that we see things and my vision and those kind of ideas. But when you kind of learn to be in a comfortable place with receiving notes, with communication in a team, and you have that really, really great collaboration, I think letting yourself be open to changing things is really important, and being open to listening to other ideas. Because I'm sure for a while I took those things very personally, because when somebody says, oh, I think maybe this should be a little different, as an artist, I think the sort of knee-jerk reaction is to say, oh, they hate my ideas and they hate what I do. So when you can get past that sort of very surface ego, and I think when you've been doing it long enough, you get beaten down enough times to make that go away. But it's an important sort of rite of passage too, to get to that point where you're all just working for the best possible story and the best possible product, as opposed to one person's vision necessarily.
The great thing about Kickstarter campaigns, and you've been through a few yourself, and I know Aaron has as well too, variant covers are usually a key factor where you're trying to showcase a different art style to get other people to look at what you're presenting, things like that. And I think it's just a great way to, I think, pay it forward for very talented artists out there. Is there anything like that for Schticks and Stones for this current Kickstarter campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about the Flash Gordon adventures from Paper Cuts that I was fortunate enough to be involved in, which came out last year in November. I got to know Mike Kunkel a little bit, who is a cartoonist that I've been in admiration of, in awe of, for 15 years or something. He did Hero Bear and the Kid. He established Astonished from Ink Factory, and he's done a bunch for DC. I think one of the most current ones was Billy Bastion and the Magic of Shazam. So his art style, has always been something that inspired me and, motivated me to be better for this project when we were talking about variant covers, because that is, like you said, something that most, if not every, Kickstarter comic has. And, it happens a lot in the direct market too, but I think when you're trying to do a campaign, it's kind of a requisite. So kind of on a whim and sort of, hat in hand, I emailed Mike and just said, hey, this is the project, this is the story that we've done so far, and would you possibly, number one, would you be available? Because this guy is very, very slammed, and I am well aware of that. So I don't take any of that for granted. But yeah, I said, would you possibly be interested in just, doing like a variant cover or something? And God love him, he said yes, and he said, this is kind of the window I have, so that's when I'll have it done, which was going to line up pretty perfectly with our campaign. It's on our page right now, sort of as a mystery cover, and we haven't shown any artwork yet. But that ends, and even though we will be debuting or revealing the artwork next week on the campaign, I was talking with Kurt and we wanted to do a little bit of an exclusive here. So we actually do have the variant cover artwork to show.
Nice. That's awesome. And if you don't enjoy this type of artwork, I have no faith in you whatsoever. This is just too beautiful to not support. Come on.
Hopefully will be a nice little mid-campaign boost too, which is something that we've been advised you kind of try to do through a campaign. Because while we've both been sort of part of the Cloakroom ones and another one or two. Aaron has been part of anthologies.
Mm,
We were more like in freelance
sure.
sort of roles with those. So this is our first that we are part of running, which has been a very eye-opening experience, to say the least. But that's one of the things that's been advised is you have these sort of beats, just like storytelling, where you kind of have to hit throughout the campaign, reinvigorate people. So yeah, hopefully this will do it. And I imagine, with his fan base, it'll be a pretty fun response. I think I wrote him back and I might have said something to the effect of 23-year-old me is plotzing through this time continuum.
That's
Hope he
awesome.
takes that as intended and not that it was 20 years ago.
As long as you don't get a cease and desist, you're perfectly fine, I'm sure.
No. We've been given authorization to share, so we're okay in that regard. I'll say, but yeah, he's just been so wonderful to don't give his time and talents. And again, I know just how slammed he is basically all the time.
Yeah.
So it was Aaron and I are both super fans. So for us, this is just we're cavelling, as our people say. We're verklempt.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Myself, I'm gonna cry.
I just remember Mike Myers in Saturday Night Live going, "Talk
Yeah,
amongst yourselves."
right. Coffee talk, and so yeah, going off on a tangent here.
Sure.
I love that too because he's not Jewish, but he has Jewish humor.
Yeah.
He has that, and I think it's because being a second city in Chicago, and he was around a lot of Jewish comedians. Some of that might have rubbed off. I mean, I know he has his own style, but he was creating Yiddish words in those segments that still sounded Yiddish. And the best part about that is you have to kind of understand the fundamentals of how a language works to do that. I always just saw it as a labor of love on his part and not mocking in any way because you have to understand it. It's kind of like cartooning, and just stay with me. Cartooning is a lot about breaking the rules to some degree. To do that in a functional way that still looks good on the page, you have to understand how anatomy and proportion and draftsmanship, you have to have a very kind of a wealth of knowledge about how that works to be able to bend those rules maybe more than break them and make it work. And so Mike Myers was kind of doing that with Yiddish, which is appreciated on my end.
Yeah, his start in Second City in Toronto initially, and then I think he did move down to Chicago as well too. But you have to have timing, whether it's as a comedian or whether it's in comics itself, especially if you're writing a funny comic. If you're not landing the funny, you're into drama or you're into something else completely. You're into a different genre whatsoever. Timing is critical and crucial when it comes to it, whether it's a visual gag or whether it's a physical gag on the page. And it's not like you have motion to bounce things off of. You're stuck in a set 8x11, whatever the case is, and however many panels you're working with. I mean, that's got to be sometimes constrictive to your creative process, though.
Yeah, it can be, but especially as of recently, I think I was for a long time I was kind of creating art to sort of prove something in a way. And in the past couple of years, I've kind of found the joy and the fun in it again. So getting back to that was something that was essential for me to be able to put that on the page again, in a way. Aaron and I have been asked a couple of times, like, what's harder to write or depict, drama or humor? And hands down, it's humor every time because, like you said, all of the pieces have to fit perfectly together to make something land. Whether you're doing it for stage, for screen, for comics, whatever it is, there's a different sort of mechanism that you have to use. But if it's not firing on all cylinders, it's not going to land. You just have a joke that falls flat, which happens. So humor is always going to be harder to write. But I think when you have enough of an understanding, I really think an understanding of humanity, and I've had enough conversations with people that just go awry, which is just part of, living in the world. There's a way that you just start distilling that when you've been thinking as a writer or an artist for a while, it just becomes, distilled through that prism of our warped art brains. But you're always kind of cataloging things like that and thinking of how to manipulate them into a sequence or so it's something you're always working on, which is why I always emphasize how the importance of like daydreaming or, sitting with ideas before actually doing anything, because those are just as important aspects, writing and storytelling, than actually being productive, because those are moments where your brain is still working on story. Letting ourselves do that, I think, can kind of lead us down some interesting paths too.
Who knows? You might take up stand up comedy afterwards, you know?
Maybe, yeah. Stand-up comedy though, I think for my money, any other kind of storytelling art form, stand-up comedy is the hardest.
Yeah.
If you're talking about, being humorous, you have to hold an entire audience's attention 45 minutes, hour, whatever the set is. And, you can't lose them for even a second or you're done. And to be that funny for that prolonged of a time, even though an hour doesn't sound like a long time, to be consistently funny or engaging, it's a lifetime. So, I mean, stand-up comedians for me are sort of the gods, for lack of a better term, of humor, because I envy what they do, but I don't envy doing it every night. I mean, you just have to love it if you're doing it, I suppose, because it's got to be so nerve-wracking every night.
Do you have three comics that have influenced your humor when it comes to your style of comic creation?
Yeah, Aaron and I both, I think, were realizing how much Harvey comics, not necessarily one specific line, but um, just that whole company's catalog has inspired us, and specifically visually, I think, in this project, but sort of the gentle humor finds its way under your skin and becomes a kind of a nostalgic thing. But so Harvey comics, for both of us, I think we realized with Sticks and Stones, that kind of in our comics DNA, even in a sort of subtle or subconscious way. Madman, for me, by Mike Allred, is probably one of those that he just combines everything and does it perfectly, in my opinion. So Mike Allred for me is one of my favorites, and he's a music guy too, which is something that I always love. I think a lot of comics people are, really, if they're not musicians, they're at least music lovers.
Yeah.
His expressiveness of his characters and the sort of, I think he's got to be very inspired by animation too, because he has that sort of line of motion and movement of his characters too, which plays integral roles when you're doing humor too. And probably Calvin and Hobbes, either Calvin and Hobbes or Pogo. Between those two, those are probably my two favorite, because comic strips is another one, is another medium or format that Aaron and I both grew up loving. Probably you two grew up with.
Yeah.
We grew up with newspaper comics and the Sunday Funnies, and then those were made into animated specials. There's kind of that through line for us too, where we loved comic strips, they got made into holiday specials. Hey, we should make a holiday special. And Aaron had the initial idea, but then the sort of more we built it out, that really, I think, was the genesis for both of us, is remembering all of those from childhood. I guess maybe in a selfish way or self-serving way, which is fine in the arts, I think.
Yeah.
When it's not offensive, we wanted to make a holiday special with our characters.
You've just come full circle from the very first question to this one here. I don't think I can add anything else more to this, to be perfectly honest. That was a great way to wrap things up, man. This is awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, man. It's so great to be back on.
For those that want to support, of course, Sticks and Stones and yourself as creative people, how can they help? Where's the Kickstarter? And anything else you would like to promote?
If you just do schticksandstones.com, that'll take you to the Kickstarter, but you can also go to Kickstarter and find Schticks and Stones. We're actually named one of the projects that Kickstarter loves, which was really cool. Aaron and I both have links on our social media, both Instagram and Blue Sky, my website. Yeah, the Flash Gordon Adventures, Volume 2 is great anthology and features people like Mike Kunkel and Stan Sakai and Ryan Estrada, and just this litany of amazing cartoonists. That was really cool. The Punk Taco Adventures came out earlier this year, which is Adam's creation, and he brought a few people on to, including Chuck D of Public Enemy. So I'm in a book with Chuck D, which is awesome. Kind of wild. Those are two more recent projects that I would love to see get some more support and love. Leave reviews if you can. And then, I'm working on a couple things with my agent. So, people can subscribe to my newsletter for free on my website. I also have links on social media. I'm trying to be much better these days about announcing and updating because having an 18-month-old, the past year has been a little bumpy for updates, but I think I'm getting back into a groove now. So
That's awesome. Well, congratulations, by the way. I
thank you.
may you not lose your hair for another 40 years. So
Yeah, hopefully, no, this is a wig, so it's already gone.
well, I hate to say it, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. Alex, thank you again so much for being on the show. I greatly appreciate it. Go support this amazing Sticks and Stones series, sticksandstones.com. It's on the lower third there. It's also going to be in the show notes as well, too. Alex has amazing artwork and comics that he's created over the years, and I can't wait to see what else he has coming on down the pipe. So you're always welcome to come back on the show, Alex. I really greatly appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Kurt. It's always a pleasure, and I will be happy to take you up on that. But your time today helping us support this campaign is very greatly appreciated.
Oh, anytime for sure. Like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You can, of course, find this interview and over 1,200 plus others because I've lost count on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. The podcast you can find by searching Two Geeks Talking. That's TWO Geeks Talking. Wherever you get your podcasts, on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, whatever else the other popular platform is these days. Who knows? I'm on
whatever the kids are using.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Stream it to the brain, whatever the case may be. I appreciate the downloads and all that stuff. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talk.